The year is 1241, and Kraków is engulfed in flames, consuming streets that have stood for centuries. Fire scales wooden structures, devouring everything in its path. The cries of the fallen mingle with the pounding of hooves, and a sound rises above it all, destined to echo through Europe for generations. The battle cries of Mongol horsemen, sweeping through the heart of Poland like a scythe through wheat. Corpses litter the streets, some still grasping untouched weapons. Poland's grandest city, deserted by its frightened inhabitants, falls without a fight. This marks just the beginning. However, this narrative distinguishes itself from other accounts of Mongol conquest. It's not a story of certain defeat, nor another chronicle of invincible armies crushing all opposition. What transpired in Poland was truly exceptional. The Mongols invaded twice, and twice Poland suffered defeat. Yet the third time, that's where our focus lies. Picture yourself on the ramparts of Kraków in December 1287, 46 years after that initial nightmare, observing another Mongol army's approach. You've heard your grandfather's tales. You know the devastation these warriors inflicted upon your city, your people, and every realm that dared to defy them. Still, this time feels different. This time, the walls beneath you are not timber. This time, Poland has learned. This time, Poland is prepared. The timeless question remains, what changed? How did a fragmented, fractured kingdom transform into the power that achieved what the mighty empires of Hungary, Russia, and countless others could not? How did Poland evolve into the anvil that finally shattered the Mongol hammer? To grasp this victory, we must revisit the beginning. We need to comprehend the true terror of the adversary and the utter completeness of Poland's initial defeat. For the transformation from victim to victor represents one of the most extraordinary sagas in medieval warfare, beginning with absolute catastrophe. The Mongol Empire of the 13th century was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. From the rice paddies of Vietnam to Russia's frozen forests, from the Middle Eastern deserts to the vast steppes of Central Asia, a single people conquered more land than the Romans ever conceived, and they did it in under a generation. These were not mere marauders. They were a military machine so advanced, so relentlessly effective, that contemporary Europeans genuinely believed they were divine retribution. They called them the horsemen of the apocalypse, and with good reason. Poland, conversely, was in disarray. Divided into competing duchies governed by perpetually feuding princes who struggled to agree on anything, it sat directly at Western Europe's threshold. If one were to design a perfect victim for Mongol conquest, 13th century Poland would be the prime candidate. Fragmented, exposed, and squarely in the path of armies fresh from annihilating the Russian principalities. The Mongols were advancing westward, and Poland was simply in their way. Before delving into that initial devastating encounter, it's vital to understand a crucial aspect of the Mongols. They were not barbarian hordes. That was the error Europeans made then, and it's a mistake still perpetuated today. The Mongol army represented the most sophisticated military force of its era, perhaps even of any era before the modern age. Their reconnaissance networks would trigger envy in modern intelligence agencies. Their communication systems, employing riders and signal fires, could relay messages across thousands of miles. They possessed a tactical adaptability that European knights, trained for linear charges, couldn't even fathom. And they had Subutai. If that name is unknown to you, it shouldn't be. Subutai was arguably the greatest military commander in human history, a general who triumphed in more battles, across more territory, against a wider array of adversaries than anyone before or since. He had subdued northern China, crushed the armies of Russia, and in 1241, he was orchestrating the invasion of Europe with the meticulousness of a chess grandmaster. The invasion strategy was elegantly simple. 3 armies would strike Europe simultaneously. The main force, led by Batu Khan with Subutai as the strategic genius, would target Hungary. This was the principal objective, the wealthy kingdom at the heart of Europe. But Subutai recognized that King Bela IV of Hungary had allies. the Bohemians to the north, the Poles to the northeast. Any of these could dispatch forces to aid Hungary, potentially complicating matters. Therefore, before the primary assault, these potential allies had to be neutralized. Poland's role in this grand design was straightforward. It was the diversion. A smaller contingent of Mongol horsemen, numbering approximately 10,000 to 12,000, under the leadership of Princes Bar and Kardon, was dispatched to sweep across Poland with the speed and destructive force of a wildfire. Their objective was not territorial acquisition or prolonged occupation, but sheer devastation. Their mission involved incinerating settlements, dispersing military units, sowing widespread terror, and, crucially, ensuring that no Polish contingent could march southward to aid the Hungarians. This was a secondary operation, a mere footnote in the larger campaign. For Poland, however, it portended an absolute catastrophe. The invasion commenced in the winter of 1240 to 41, unfolding with a swiftness that the Poles found utterly baffling. European armies typically advanced at a sluggish pace, encumbered by their reliance on supply convoys and the intricate logistics of feudal levies. The Mongols, in stark contrast, moved with remarkable celerity. Their horses enabled them to traverse distances in mere days that would take European forces weeks. They sustained themselves off the land, each warrior carrying provisions such as dried meat and mare's milk, thus being unburdened by the need for extensive supply trains. Furthermore, their sophisticated intelligence network, composed of captured prisoners and local informants, allowed them to pinpoint the locations of Polish forces well before the Poles themselves were aware of their adversaries' positions. The town of Sots was the initial target. The Mongols struck it with overwhelming might, leaving behind such utter ruin that reconstruction was impossible. The town simply ceased to exist, erased from the map so completely that historians still debate its precise former location. Next fell Lublin, a flourishing trading hub. Sander, a formidable fortress city expected to withstand a siege for weeks, capitulated on February 13th following a brief encirclement. Nevertheless, the Mongols plundered it, as this act conveyed their overarching message. Whether one surrendered or resisted, the outcome remained the same. Terror served as their principal weapon, which they wielded with masterful precision. At this juncture, the fractured political state of Poland proved fatal. Had the Polish forces unified, they might potentially have outnumbered the Mongol raiders. But such unity demanded intricate coordination, mutual trust, and the willingness of contending dukes to set aside their differences and collaborate. It necessitated time, and time was a luxury the Mongols never afforded their adversaries. At Tursko, on February 13th, the Mongols engaged in their first significant battle on Polish soil. The forces of Lesser Poland, commanded by the local voivode, confronted them in open combat. Polish knights, clad in chainmail and mounted on heavy war horses, charged with the full fervor of courage and chivalry their culture glorified. Yet, they rode headlong into a time-honored Mongol stratagem. The Mongol vanguard, comprising lightly armed cavalry wielding composite bows, executed a swift pivot and feigned retreat. To the Polish knights, raised on tales of valorous charges and cavalry triumphs, this appeared to be a resounding success. The enemy was in flight. The imperative was to pursue them, shatter their formation, and achieve glory. Thus they charged, leaving their infantry behind and breaking their own ranks in pursuit of what they believed to be a vanquished foe. It was a snare. It was always a snare. The feigned retreat was a fundamental principle of Mongol warfare, a tactic they had employed to annihilate armies from China to Persia. The retreating Mongol cavalry lured the Polish knights into a carefully prepared ambush. Fresh units assailed them from the flanks, catching them with their horses exhausted and their formation fragmented. In this scenario, the weight of their armor transformed from an advantage into a crippling liability. The Battle of Tursko degenerated into a slaughter. The voivode perished on the battlefield, and with his death vanished Poland's primary and best opportunity to halt the invasion. 5 days later, at Śmilnik, the same grim scenario unfolded. Another Polish contingent, this time including troops from Kiev and Sandomir, engaged the Mongols in battle. Once more, a feigned retreat. Once more, a devastating ambush and another massacre. The pattern was now unmistakably clear, yet comprehending the trap and successfully evading it proved to be two entirely different challenges. The Mongols were simply more adept at this form of warfare than any adversary the Poles had ever encountered. Then arrived March 24th, when the Mongols reached Kraków itself. It's imperative to understand that medieval Kraków was not a provincial backwater. It stood as one of Central Europe's grandest cities, a vibrant center of commerce and culture, home to thousands and fortified by walls, towers, and all the defensive capabilities that medieval engineering could provide. The Mongols surveyed the city, considered their campaign timeline, and recalled their directives to maintain momentum and tie down Polish forces. They made a calculated decision. They did not even attempt a siege. Instead, they simply set it ablaze. The populace had fled, as had the Duke. The city stood largely deserted, and the Mongols put it to the torch. The largest city in Poland, consumed by flames. And the Mongol army did not even pause. They had more significant objectives ahead. For at this juncture, Duke Henry II of Silesia was marshalling the most substantial army Poland could possibly assemble. Henry, one of fragmented Poland's most powerful nobles, governed Silesia and held the title of High Duke. He grasped the gravity of the threat. He understood that if the Mongols were not halted, they would sweep through Poland and continue their advance into Bohemia, Germany, and beyond. Consequently, he gathered every available force. He rallied all available forces, his Silesian soldiers, troops from Greater Poland, knights from military orders, Templars and Hospitallers sent personally by the Pope, along with foreign volunteers, Bavarian miners, and anyone else willing to fight. He then made a critical choice. He abandoned Wrocław, Silesia's largest and arguably most crucial fortress, allowing the Mongols to seize it without resistance. Henry's motivation was time. He was in a race against it. His brother-in-law, King Wenceslaus I of Bohemia, was en route with a substantial army. If Henry could unite with the Bohemians, their combined strength could actually challenge the Mongols. His objective was merely to delay the invaders until the Bohemians arrived. The Mongols, however, were equally aware of this, possessing a remarkable intelligence network. They knew Wenceslaus's exact location, his estimated arrival time, and understood the imperative to prevent the two forces from merging. Consequently, they broke off their siege of Wrocław and sped to intercept Henry's army before the Bohemians could join him. The two armies clashed near Legnica, at a location the Germans named Valstadt, or _0_. The events of April 9, 1241, at this site would resonate through Polish history for generations. The morning of April 9th brought a stark, almost mocking clarity to Legnica. After months of turmoil, burning cities and desperate retreats, Henry II finally had his opportunity. He had amassed between 25,000 and 30,000 men, the most formidable army that the fragmented Poland had fielded in a generation. His ranks included knights from 3 separate military orders, warriors bound by vows to combat the enemies of Christendom. He also commanded his seasoned Silesian forces, troops from Greater Poland, cavalry from Opole, and even those Bavarian miners who had journeyed so far to confront the Mongol threat. In contrast, the Mongol force he faced was smaller, estimated at about 8,000 to 10,000 cavalry, potentially diminished by prior engagements at Śmilnik and Tursko. On paper, Henry possessed a numerical advantage. On paper, this was Poland's opportunity. On paper, the collective might of Christian Europe should have been adequate to halt what was, ultimately, a raiding party that had been campaigning for months. However, paper statistics mean little when confronting Mongol generals who had dedicated their lives to perfecting warfare. Henry divided his troops into 4 main divisions, adhering to a standard medieval formation. One flank was composed of Bavarian miners led by Bololus of Moravia. Conscripts from Greater Poland under Suliswo, brother of the late Palatine of Kov, formed another. The army of Apollo, commanded by Meshko, occupied the third position. Henry himself directed the 4th Division, comprising his elite Silesians, Moravians, and the knights from the military orders, the pinnacle of Christian cavalry. Men trained their entire lives for mounted combat, poised to charge beneath the banner of the cross. The Mongol army arrayed itself with the deceptive simplicity characteristic of their tactics. Light cavalry, the Mangudai, formed the vanguard. These swift skirmishers, mounted archers renowned for their devastating accuracy with composite bows, harassed the enemy. Behind them, hidden from European view, waited the heavier Mongol cavalry and the commanders who had masterminded victories from the Pacific to the Baltic. The battle commenced with the Silesian cavalry, Henry's finest mounted troops, thundering forward to engage the Mongol vanguard. This was the moment they had trained for, the essence of their military culture, the charge, the impact, the close quarters melee. For a brief instant, it appeared to be successful. The Mongol light cavalry retreated before the onslaught, scattering and fleeing. Every seasoned Mongol warrior on the field recognized this maneuver instantly, having executed it hundreds of times before. The Silesian cavalry pursued them naturally. Victory seemed achievable, and their training and culture dictated that a fleeing enemy should be ridden down and annihilated. Behind them, the cavalry of Greater Poland and Opole, witnessing what appeared to be success, joined the pursuit. Thousands of heavy cavalry, the elite warriors of the Three Kingdoms, pounded across the field, chasing light cavalry that seemed to melt away before them. And then it happened. The trap sprung shut. Fresh Mongol units struck like hammers from the flanks. Light cavalry, perfectly positioned, enveloped the pursuing Europeans. Then came the smoke. An obscured battlefield, likely from a primitive smokescreen or simply the churned earth and chaos of combat, enveloped the engagement in a dense mist, as reported by chroniclers of the era. This dark cloud concealed the movements of the Mongol forces, sowing profound disarray among the European contingents, which had become disconnected from their foot soldiers, widely dispersed in pursuit and outflanked on both sides. The Polish cavalry found themselves trapped in a dire situation. The Mongol horsemen repeatedly advanced and attacked, then withdrew and attacked again, unleashing volleys of arrows from horseback with the masterful precision honed by a lifetime spent in the saddle. The European fighters, accustomed to executing a single, decisive charge, were caught in a swirling melee where their strengths proved futile and their vulnerabilities led to their demise. The conflict quickly turned into a gruesome massacre. While some contemporary accounts exaggerate the number, claiming 30,000 European warriors perished, even cautious estimates indicate casualties in the thousands. The elite of Poland's nobility, the knights of various military orders, and the volunteers who had rallied to defend Christendom were all annihilated in a battle that concluded in mere hours. Duke Henry II, recognizing the dire state of the conflict, attempted to escape with 3 of his bodyguards, but was overtaken by Mongol cavalry shortly after, who mercilessly slew him and decapitated him on the blood-drenched fields of Wallstatt. In a horrific display intended to crush any lingering resistance, his head was impaled on a spear and paraded before the walls of Legnica. The individual meant to be Poland's savior was reduced to a war trophy. His wife Anna later identified his remains by a distinguishing feature. Henry possessed 6 toes on his left foot. Such an intimate detail imbues historical events with a poignant sadness. A woman sifting through mounds of deceased, stripped of armor and honor, to find her husband by counting his toes. I must be absolutely candid here, and this reveals my personal bias. After extensive study of medieval military history, the Battle of Legnica evokes a particular indignation in me, unlike most other conflicts. My frustration isn't directed at the Mongols, who were brilliant strategists executing a masterful plan, but at the persistent failure of European military culture to adapt. The feigned retreat had been a staple Mongol tactic for centuries, successfully devastating armies from China to Hungary. Yet the Polish knights, brimming with confidence in their training, valor, and heavy armor, pursued a retreating foe with the tactical finesse of a bull charging a matador. Bravery cannot substitute for intelligence, and courage is meaningless when one charges headlong into an unmistakable trap. If this narrative likewise sparks your ire, if you contemplate how this tragedy could have been averted had the Europeans learned from their adversaries instead of dismissing them as savages, please share your thoughts, as we are about to witness this pattern recur. I'm keen to know if you share my exasperation at purportedly brilliant military leaders repeating the same errors. The immediate aftermath of Legnica plunged the region into pandemonium. King Wenceslaus of Bohemia, who was en route to join forces with Henry, arrived a day too late, discovering the Polish army utterly demolished. He retreated to Bohemia, though his forces did manage to repel a Mongol reconnaissance party near Kłodzko. Their objective of neutralizing aid to Hungary achieved, the Mongols then bifurcated into raiding formations. They laid waste to Moravia, terrorized Silesia, and pushed into Lužice. Small detachments fanned out across the countryside, seizing what they desired, incinerating what they couldn't transport, leaving behind a trail of devastation that would require generations to mend. 2 days after Legnica, on April 11th, the other decisive blow fell. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, Subotai and Batu Khan obliterated the Hungarian royal army, leading to the deaths of between 1.25% of Hungary's population in the subsequent campaign. Within a single week, 2 of Eastern Europe's most influential kingdoms had been shattered. The path to Western Europe lay undefended. Then, an utterly unforeseen event transpired. In December of 1241, far off in Karakorum, the Mongol capital, Ögedei Khan passed away. As the Great Khan, the supreme leader of the Mongol Empire, his death necessitated the return of all royal princes to their homeland for the Kurultai, the grand assembly tasked with electing his successor. Batu Khan, despite his plans to advance westward toward the Atlantic Ocean, was compelled to abandon his conquests and journey thousands of miles back across the steppe. Europe was spared, not by military might, stronger defenses, or a brilliant strategic countermove, but by sheer, unexpected fortune, a death in Mongolia. The Mongols retreated, and Western Europe exhaled in relief. However, for Poland, there was no respite. Legnica represented a complete catastrophe on every level. Henry II's demise delayed the unification of Poland by many decades. The initial vulnerability of Poland, rooted in decentralization, solidified as competing successors vied for remnants of Henry II's domain. Silesia, previously under Henry's sway, drifted entirely from Polish influence, eventually integrating into the Bohemian crown. Settlements like Sutesk remained in ruins. The emotional scars far outstripped the physical destruction. Poland had been brutally educated on the might of the Mongol Empire. They had experienced firsthand the sheer force of the most formidable military machine of the medieval era. They had learned that courage, heavily armed cavalry, and Christian conviction were insufficient against an adversary with a superior approach to warfare. The crucial question was, would they internalize these lessons? Would they adapt their strategies? Or would they simply cling to the hope that such a horror would never recur? Because, in the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had a distinct nature. They neither forgot nor forgave, and their expansion ceased for no Khan's passing. The empire advanced under new leadership and fresh ambitions. Poland, positioned directly on the frontier and on the path to Western Europe's prosperous kingdoms, remained an exposed target. Poland had an 18-year reprieve before the Mongols returned. 18 years to rebuild, strengthen defenses, and prepare. 18 years to learn from the 1241 catastrophe and construct a system capable of thwarting the next incursion. Most of this time was squandered. The year is 1259. For a Polish peasant who endured the initial invasion, the past 18 years were spent attempting to erase the memory. Villages had been reconstructed, fields resown, Perhaps children had been raised who never witnessed the horsemen with their recurved bows and ruthless efficiency. One might have even begun to believe the ordeal was a singular disaster, a divine retribution that had passed, a nightmare that wouldn't resurface. This belief would be mistaken. In 1259, the Golden Horde, the western division of the Mongol Empire, now under the command of Berka Khan, decided it was time to remind Poland of their control over the eastern steppes. This wasn't the large-scale coordinated assault of 1241. It was something almost more contemptuous, a raid. Two Tumans, roughly 20,000 cavalry led by Nogai Khan and General Burunde, surged into Poland with directives to punish, loot, and impress upon the Poles the consequences of resistance. They also had a secondary motive. The Mongols laid claim to the Cumans, a Turkic people who had migrated westward, as their vassals. Many Cumans had settled in Hungary and Poland, and the Mongols demanded their return. Or so the pretext went. The actual reason was simpler. The Golden Horde required wealth, needed to maintain the prowess of its warriors, and Poland offered a convenient solution. Lublin was once again sacked. Sears was plundered. Sandomierz, which had capitulated in 1241 in hopes of clemency, was pillaged. Zawichost was devastated. Kraków, meticulously rebuilt over 18 years, was ravaged anew. Bochnia was torched. The second invasion cut through Poland with the ease of a scythe through ripe grain, and the Poles found themselves just as defenseless as before. Yet, here lies an intriguing detail, a nascent sign of impending change. This time, some fortifications endured. Not many, not enough to halt the raid, but certain stone citadels were simply bypassed by the Mongols, who lacked the time or equipment for prolonged sieges. The Mongols were now raiders, not conquerors. They sought swift incursions, easy spoils, and rapid withdrawal. Anything requiring a siege was deemed unworthy of their effort. Pope Alexander IV attempted to organize a crusade against the Tatars, as Europeans referred to the Mongols. It yielded no results. No one desired to confront the seemingly invincible empire, especially after its recent demonstration of being able to strike deep into Europe at will. Meanwhile, in Hungary, a more significant development was unfolding. King Bela IV, who had narrowly survived the catastrophe at Mohi, had dedicated the preceding 18 years to an intense construction program. Hundreds of stone castles arose across Hungary, transforming the kingdom from a land reliant on wooden defenses to a network of stone strongholds. Bela grasped a truth that many of his contemporaries failed to recognize. The Mongols could decimate armies in open battle, but siege warfare was not their forte. A kingdom capable of retreating behind stone walls, forcing the Mongols into protracted, arduous sieges, might actually survive. Poland, divided and impoverished, could not match Hungary's building endeavors. Some defenses were improved. Certain cities received stone walls. However, the systematic overhaul that Hungary underwent simply did not occur. Poland remained exposed, a fact known to all. Another 27 years elapsed. A generation grew up listening to tales of the two invasions, stories that likely became more terrifying with each recitation. Narratives of horsemen who drank blood, of warriors who could shoot arrows backward at a full gallop. The speed of these armies outpaced even the swiftest news. While some stories were undoubtedly embellished, many were rooted in harsh reality. Over those same 27 years, Poland underwent a gradual transformation. Not swiftly, nor dramatically, but painstakingly, brick by brick, a transformed nation started to emerge from the wreckage of 1241 and 1259. Central to this evolution was a man who likely never envisioned himself as a hero, and certainly never expected to be the savior of his realm from the Mongol Empire. His name was Leszek II, remembered historically as Leszek the Black, possibly due to his dark hair or perhaps his somber disposition. He ascended to the position of High Duke of Poland in 1279, presiding over a still fragmented kingdom where the title of High Duke carried less influence than it ought to have. Leszek didn't fit the mold of a warrior king like the fabled Boleslav the Brave. He was a statesman, a survivor, a man who understood that true power stemmed from consolidation and foresight, not from glorious but reckless assaults. In 1282, merely 3 years into his reign, this understanding was severely tested when the nobility rose in rebellion. The intricacies of medieval Polish political affairs are convoluted and, frankly, rather monotonous. However, the crucial point is this. In 1285, Leszek faced a formidable insurrection led by powerful aristocrats, including Otto of Sandomierz. The rebels actually managed to force Leszek out of Poland. He was compelled to seek refuge in Hungary, the same Hungary that had been remade into a fortress nation, and plead for aid. On May 3, 1285, at the Battle of Bogucic, Leszek, bolstered by Hungarian backing, crushed the uprising. It was a decisive triumph, the kind that doesn't just defeat adversaries, but utterly shatters their will. From that moment, Leszek's authority became more stable, more centralized, and more effective at achieving results. And what he accomplished was fortifying the kingdom. Extensive fortifications. The citadel of Kraków, twice razed by the Mongols, was entirely reconstructed in stone. No inflammable wood, no eroding earth, but stone capable of withstanding fire and siege machinery. The castle was equipped with catapults and crossbows, armaments designed to repel attackers. Sandomierz received similar enhancements. Tuchola was fortified. Even the Świętokrzyski Abbey in the Świętokrzyski Mountains, a monastic complex ordinarily defenseless against raiders, was converted into a stronghold. While this wasn't the vast construction program undertaken by Hungary, it was a significant step. For the first time since the Mongol incursions began, Poland was actively preparing. Not merely hoping or praying, but concretely readying itself for the inevitable return of the Eastern menace. At this juncture, it's important to discuss a critical aspect that distinguishes the Third Invasion. On the first 2 occasions that the Mongols assailed Poland, they encountered a kingdom that was merely reactive, responding to the invasion as it unfolded, reacting to the army upon its arrival, responding to the siege as it commenced. Everything was reactive, defensively in the worst possible sense. What Leszek achieved, slowly and without undue fanfare, was to reorient Poland towards proactivity, constructing defenses before the army appears, devising strategy before the siege commences, considering how to fight the next conflict, not dwelling on the last. It's a simple change, but it marks the divide between victim and survivor. It's the difference between hoping for good fortune and actively forging one's destiny. And in 1287, when Nogai Khan began assembling his forces for the Third Invasion of Poland, this shift would prove absolutely pivotal. If you're captivated by this account of transformation, of a fractured kingdom gradually amassing the strength to oppose an empire, ensure you're subscribed, because what follows is the culmination of all that preparation. And I assure you, it will be worth the wait. In November 1287, Nogai Khan, a dominant commander within the Golden Horde, dispatched messages to the Ruthenian princes, Mongol vassals who governed the territories between the steppe and Poland. The directive was unambiguous. Muster your armies and advance with me against Poland. This was not a request. It was an imperative from a man capable of obliterating anyone who defied him. The Galician Volhynian Chronicle describes Nogai's assembled force as a, quote, 130,000 cavalry, a colossal army by medieval warfare standards. This was not a skirmish like that of 1259. This was a serious military operation engineered to penalize Poland for perceived transgressions and to prevent Duke Leszek from meddling in Hungarian and Ruthenian political affairs. The strategy was elaborate. 2 columns would launch simultaneous invasions. The northern column, comprising 20,000 men, including Ruthenian vassals under Talabuga Khan, would strike towards Sandomierz and northern Lesser Poland. The southern column, 10,000 pure Mongol and Turk cavalry under Nogai himself, would target Kraków and the region surrounding Stary Sots. The two forces intended to plunder their respective areas, then converge north of Krakow before sweeping through a predetermined route designed to devastate central Poland. Upon their return to Ruthenia, their horses would be laden with spoils and their reputation further cemented. This was a sound strategy, one that had proven successful on two prior occasions, a plan that viewed Poland as mere prey rather than a capable adversary. Yet, for the first time in nearly 5 decades, Poland itself was poised to prove them wrong. On December 7, 1287, Talabuga Khan spearheaded his force of 20,000 cavalry from their encampment near Vladimir, heading westward towards Poland. Despite it being winter, a season when medieval armies typically retired to winter quarters, the Mongols consistently grasped that striking when an opponent least expected it embodied the core of effective military planning. Winter also presented the advantage of frozen rivers, serving as natural routes for cavalry. The very season that incapacitated European armies amplified the Mongols' mobility. However, the Vistula River remained unfrozen. This river, which should have served as a swift route, continued to flow, compelling Talabuga's army to scour for fords, advancing south along the riverbank, ceding both time and their element of surprise. This initial setback hinted that this invasion would diverge from previous ones. Upon reaching the fortress of Sandomir, the Mongols anticipated a repetition of what they had twice encountered: timber fortifications ripe for burning, terrified defenders ready to capitulate rather than endure a siege, and an effortless victory that would establish the campaign's trajectory. Instead, they found stone. The stronghold that had so readily surrendered in 1241 had undergone a radical transformation. Stone walls, a well-equipped, provisioned, and resolute garrison, along with catapults positioned atop the walls and crossbowmen in the towers. The Mongols laid siege, and they failed. For the first time across 3 invasions of Poland, a significant Mongol contingent proved unable to capture a pivotal fortification. Sandomierz endured, and Talabuga's army, which had intended to pillage the city and utilize it as a base, was compelled to abandon the siege and press on with the campaign sans that anticipated triumph. This outcome was profoundly significant. The Mongol strategy relied heavily on momentum, rapid movement, and the psychological impact of an unyielding advance. Each failed objective, every bypass of a fortress or abandoned siege, chipped away at their perceived invincibility. In medieval warfare, morale and renown held as much weight as actual combat prowess. Talabuga subsequently divided his forces, adhering to standard Mongol tactics. Smaller detachments fanned out to plunder, collect intelligence, and keep the defenders off balance. One such detachment approached the Wysogora Abbey in the Świętokrzyskie Mountains, while another advanced towards the town of Tursko. All encountered fortified positions and local resistance forces that sallied forth to engage them in minor skirmishes. This represented Lek's strategy in operation: avoid a large-scale open-field battle where the Mongols' superior cavalry tactics could decimate another Polish army. Instead, force them to disperse, compel them to assault fortified strongholds, and allow local garrisons to gradually wear them down. The Mongol advantage lay in their mobility and tactical adaptability in open combat. Remove the open field, and their advantage evaporated. On December 20, 1287, near the Świętokrzyskie Mountains, in the vicinity of a place called Wago, an extraordinary event unfolded. Duke Lech II, commanding a Polish force of an unspecified but substantial size, intercepted Talabuga's main column. The Mongols, having sought easier targets and overstretched their forces, suddenly confronted a concentrated Polish army in terrain unsuitable for cavalry maneuvers. The Battle of Wago was not a massive engagement. Detailed tactical accounts or precise casualty figures are elusive. Nevertheless, the outcome is astounding. The Poles emerged victorious. This was no Pyrrhic victory or temporary setback for the Mongols, but a genuine and decisive defeat that drove Talabuga's army into retreat. Sources describe it as quite severe. Talabuga's forces fell back to the Kelsey area before commencing a full retreat, carrying off whatever plunder they had already amassed and abandoning the campaign entirely. By January 1288, they were back in their winter camp in Lviv, and the northern invasion concluded. To reiterate this crucial point, for the first time in the history of Mongol-Polish conflict, a Mongol army was vanquished in battle and expelled from Poland. This was not due to fortune or the demise of a distant Khan, but through Polish military might, Polish strategic planning, and Polish resolve. Lech, for his part, did not pause to celebrate. He promptly marched his army south towards Kiev, recognizing that Nogai Khan's southern contingent remained active in the field and that Kiev was its objective. Nogai had entered Poland on December 24th, Christmas Eve, with 10,000 elite Mongol and Turk cavalry. This was a pure Mongol force, devoid of Ruthenian auxiliaries, the kind that had instilled dread across Europe for 2 generations, and their target was the same city they had razed twice before, Kiev. The metropolis they encountered was drastically different from its state in 1241 or 1259. Its defenses now boasted formidable fixed stone walls. The former wooden and earthen citadel had been transformed into a stronghold capable of withstanding any assault from medieval siege equipment. The resident troops were not only prepared, but also well armed with their own siege weaponry, including catapults, large and small crossbows, and an arsenal specifically designed for defensive combat. Nogai's forces initiated their attack but were repelled, suffering significant casualties in the process. Historical accounts explicitly mention that numerous Mongol commanders, veterans of countless campaigns, perished during the assault on Kiev while attempting to seize a city they had anticipated would be an easy conquest. Nogai, confronted with an impregnable fortress and aware of Talabuga's northern contingent's defeat, made a strategic choice. He decentralized his forces into smaller units and reverted to the Mongol strengths, raiding. If Kraków remained unattainable, he vowed to ravage the surrounding countryside. His troops fanned out across the northern and southern areas of the city, ransacking villages and engaging in minor skirmishes with local militias originating from towns and castles. Nogai's 2 other detachments proceeded south into the mountainous regions. One unit laid siege to Podolenic, eventually capturing it after clashes with local militias, albeit at a considerable price. The other beleaguered Starch, a well-fortified town in the foothills that had anticipated such a scenario. Stary Sącz notably exemplified the changes occurring in Poland. The town had amassed food supplies, possessed robust walls, and its garrison comprised a blend of local knights and armed peasants, all resolved to defend their homes. The siege protracted for a month, yielding no progress for the Mongols. Every day spent outside the walls meant lost opportunities for plundering and accumulating spoils, while simultaneously depleting their provisions and tiring their mounts. Meanwhile, Lech implemented the most audacious facet of his strategy. Entrusting his troops with Kiev's defense, he discreetly departed Poland with his wife and a small retinue, undertaking a desperate journey to Hungary. His objective mirrored Henry II's attempt in 1241 to secure allies, procure reinforcements, and assemble a force capable of not just defense but offense. King Ladislaus IV of Hungary comprehended Lech's predicament perfectly. Only 2 years prior, in 1285, Ladislaus had vanquished another Mongol incursion into Hungary. The extensive castle-building initiative commenced by Baylor IV was proving its worth, and Hungary had mastered effective anti-Mongol tactics. When Lech sought assistance, Ladislaus readily agreed. He assigned a Hungarian nobleman, George of Sovar, the task of leading an expeditionary force into Poland. George gathered his soldiers and embarked on the northern march from Podolin and Keshmarok, enlisting Polish forces along the route. A formidable Hungarian-Polish alliance was materializing, directly targeting the Mongol forces encamped around Star. the Mongols remained oblivious to the impending assault. However, before delving into that pivotal engagement, the story of the Goryls warrants attention. While major armies maneuvered and nobles formulated strategies, Poland's common populace engaged in their own conflict. The Goryls, highlanders inhabiting the Podhale region, are the mountain inhabitants of the Carpathian foothills. They are not knights or professional soldiers, but shepherds, farmers, and artisans who intimately understand their mountainous terrain, much like sailors know the sea. When Mongol detachments encroached upon their territory, the Goryls armed themselves with whatever was available and resisted. Folk legend, likely rooted in truth, recounts a confrontation between a Mongol contingent and local highlanders in the Kosaliska Valley. The Goryls attacked Mongol camps along the Dunajec River, ultimately expelling them from the area. This was not a conventional battle with formations and cavalry charges. It was guerrilla warfare. Mountain dwellers exploited their topographical knowledge to ambush raiders accustomed to open steppe combat. The Mongols, who had subdued armies from China to Hungary, found themselves stalemated by Polish shepherds who refused to surrender their homes without a fight. This highlights the distinct nature of this third invasion. It wasn't solely about fortifications, strategy, or leadership. It was about Poland's collective resolve, from top to bottom, to no longer be victims. Thus, in January 1288, George of Sovar's Hungarian-Polish contingent approached Starch. The Mongol army besieging the town, comprising roughly 1,000 men, had been there for a month. They were exhausted, frustrated, and fixated on the walls before them, neglecting their rear. George's force struck them with astonishing suddenness, achieving complete surprise. The Mongol contingent, trapped between the town's defenders surging forth and the relief column attacking from the rear, met its complete downfall. Not merely vanquished or repelled, but utterly wiped out. Historical records confirm this unequivocally. The joint Hungarian-Polish contingent caught a smaller Mongol force of 1,000 off guard and eradicated it. Their leader perished, and the entire unit was obliterated. This marked the final significant clash of the Third Mongol incursion into Poland, culminating in a resounding Polish triumph. Nogai Khan, receiving reports of the catastrophe at Stary Sots, acknowledging Talabuga's prior retreat, and recognizing that Lech II was mobilizing the primary Polish army, bolstered by Hungarian allies, understood the implications. His troops were scattered, while his adversaries consolidated. His planned rendezvous with Talabuga was now impossible. Remaining would risk his entire command being encircled and destroyed. Consequently, in late January 1288, Nogai Khan withdrew from Poland. The third invasion had concluded, and for the first time in history, the Mongols departed Poland not as victors, nor even as successful marauders, but as a vanquished army. Let's delve into the actual events here, as the resonance of this third invasion far exceeds a solitary successful defense. This was no mere stroke of luck or chance occurrence. Instead, it represented a methodical dismantling of Mongol strategy by a kingdom that had spent 47 years perfecting its survival tactics. Consider the three invasions. In 1241, Poland suffered approximately 30,000 casualties at Legnica alone. Kraków was incinerated. Wrocław was abandoned without a struggle. Sandomierz surrendered, only to be sacked regardless. The Mongols swept through Poland with relentless efficiency, achieving every objective and leaving widespread destruction. In 1259, history repeated itself. Lublin, Shiraz, Sandomierz, Kraków, all plundered. The Poles were powerless to stop them, barely able to impede their advance. The only saving grace was that this time, the Mongols were raiders, not conquerors, departing once they had secured their desired spoils. Yet, in 1287–88, the Mongols failed to seize a single major city or fortification. Sandomierz held, Kraków held, Stary Sots held. They did capture some villages and smaller settlements, to be sure, but nothing of substantial importance. They incurred significant losses, including seasoned commanders. They endured an actual military defeat at Wago and the complete destruction at Stary Sots, ultimately retreating, abandoning their objectives and concluding their campaign. Historian Stefan Kovsky attributes this dramatic shift to two primary factors. Firstly, the Mongol leadership was fragmented. Talabuga and Nogai's coordination was poor, possibly due to rivalry or strategic disagreements. When Talabuga retreated after his defeat, Nogai was left exposed, and a disjointed invasion force is inherently vulnerable. However, the second reason holds greater weight. Poland's enhanced fortifications made its settlements considerably more resilient, enabling Lech II and his nobles to deploy a three-phase defensive strategy that was remarkably ingenious in its simplicity. Phase 1 involved passive defense by garrisons. The fortified towns and castles maintained their positions, refusing to be intimidated, thereby compelling the Mongols to either besiege them or bypass them. Every bypassed fortress served as a sanctuary for the local populace and a launchpad for future operations. Phase 2 saw local forces sallying forth to engage smaller Mongol detachments. This aspect often receives insufficient recognition. While the main Mongol armies were formidable, their smaller raiding parties were susceptible. Polish forces from the fortified positions could launch strikes against these detachments, harassing them, inflicting casualties, and then retreating to their strongholds. This amounted to a death by 1,000 cuts. The third phase involved a major counterattack by a combined Hungarian-Polish army against the dispersed and weakened Mongols. This is precisely what occurred at Stary Sots, and it's what would have befallen Nogai's entire force had he remained in Poland. Once the Mongols were spread thin and diminished by attrition and minor losses, they were no match. It is an intelligent and effective approach, a stark contrast to the strategy Poland employed in 1241, when they attempted to confront the Mongols in an open-field battle and were decisively defeated. I want to emphasize something clearly, as I believe there is a tendency in history to overcorrect and begin portraying the defeated party as incompetent. The Mongols were by no means incompetent. They remained one of the most formidable military powers globally. Their cavalry tactics were still superior to those of European knights in open-field engagements, and their strategic planning remained sophisticated. However, warfare is not solely about tactics. It's about adaptability. It's about learning from errors and adjusting one's approach. The Mongols clung to the same methodology that had proven successful for 2 generations across 3 continents. Poland, however, altered the rules of engagement. They did not try to best the Mongols in cavalry tactics, recognizing it as a losing proposition. Instead, they engineered circumstances where the Mongols' cavalry tactics proved ineffective, essentially neutralizing their strengths. Strong stone walls are impervious to the prowess of horse archers. They cannot be fooled by feigned retreats. These unyielding barriers simply stand, obliging an aggressor to either deploy non-existent siege equipment or retreat. Each day spent grappling with these defenses is a day diverted from achieving primary objectives. Moreover, the human element was crucial. Lech II deserves far greater recognition for this triumph. He wasn't a legendary warrior or a leader of heroic cavalry charges. He was a shrewd politician and administrator who grasped that meticulous preparation and sound strategy trumped raw courage and improvisation. He oversaw the construction of fortifications, organized the defense, and undertook a perilous diplomatic journey to Hungary to secure allies. He orchestrated a multi-stage defensive plan across a kingdom still fragmented. And credit is also due to the people of Poland, from the knights steadfastly holding the walls of Kopsivnica to the Górals who ambushed Mongol raiders in the mountains. The contrast between 1241 and 1287 wasn't solely about fortifications. It was about an unyielding will to resist, a fierce determination to fight, and a refusal to passively accept Mongol inevitability. What truly strikes me and stirs my emotions about this narrative is that Poland in 1287 was neither a major power nor wealthy or unified. It lacked the resources of Hungary or the military sophistication of the Teutonic Knights. What it possessed was a collective memory of two devastating defeats and an ironclad resolve to prevent a third. This is profoundly impactful. It's the kind of historical juncture that demonstrates defeat isn't necessarily permanent, and that extracting lessons from failure is more vital than avoiding failure altogether. Poland suffered two grievous, catastrophic defeats, yet they rallied, erected stone walls, learned from their errors, and when the Mongols returned anticipating another effortless victory, Poland shattered their army and drove them off. If this account doesn't ignite your spirit, you might need to check your pulse. Should it inspire you, please share in the comments what you consider the most significant factor in Poland's victory. Was it the fortifications, the strategy, the leadership, the Hungarian alliance, or merely the sheer tenacity of a people who refused subjugation? Your thoughts would be greatly appreciated. The repercussions of the Third Invasion resonated throughout Eastern Europe. The Mongols never again invaded Poland. Consider that fact. They had attacked 3 times in under 50 years, and after 1288, their incursions simply ceased. Poland had demonstrated that invading was no longer cost-effective. The fortifications were too formidable, the defense too coordinated, and the potential for defeat too stark. The Golden Horde consequently shifted its focus elsewhere. When they needed to assert influence over Poland, they resorted to diplomacy and threats instead of military action. In 1356, Casimir III the Great even forged an agreement with the Golden Horde, reportedly agreeing to pay tribute in exchange for military assistance against other adversaries. This arrangement acknowledged Mongol power without demanding actual subservience. However, the psychological impact extended beyond Poland itself. The Mongols had been defeated, not by the great kingdoms of Western Europe with their imposing castles and professional armies, nor by the military orders with their centuries of crusading expertise. They were defeated by Poland, a divided, relatively impoverished nation still recuperating from prior invasions. Poland. If Poland could achieve it, anyone could. The aura of Mongol invincibility, already weakened by their inability to fully conquer Hungary in the 1280s, suffered another blow. The empire that had terrorized Europe for 2 generations was revealed to be, if not entirely beatable in every scenario, at least not unstoppable. And here is what I find particularly gratifying about this story. The Mongols triumphed when they leveraged their superior mobility, intelligence, and adaptable tactics. These advantages were genuine. Yet, Poland's victory stemmed from a simpler approach. They erected walls and defended them. They didn't attempt to outmaneuver the Mongols. They simply made it exceedingly difficult for the Mongol advantages to count. There's a profound lesson here about asymmetric warfare, about how to overcome a superior enemy not by fighting on their terms, but by changing the terms entirely. You create conditions where their strengths become irrelevant and your own strengths prevail. The Mongols excelled at mobile warfare, so Poland eliminated mobile warfare from the equation. They fought from fortifications, forced sieges, and made the enemy come to them. This same principle would later empower other kingdoms to resist Mongol expansion. It is the same principle that clarifies why the Mongols never conquered Western Europe, despite possessing the military capability to do so. Solid defenses coupled with unwavering resolve form a potent combination, particularly when an aggressor operates far from their primary supply bases. The fabled Legnica, Cov's unofficial emblem, is said to have originated during this very invasion. The tale recounts how a group of Poles discovered a Mongol encampment outside the city walls in December 1287 amidst a siege. They launched a surprise assault, eliminating several Mongol commanders, including the siege's leader. Subsequently, one of the Polish warriors donned the commander's armor and paraded through Kraków on a hobby horse in celebration. Is this account entirely accurate? Probably not regarding the minute specifics. Medieval lore seldom is. However, the annual Leonic festival, celebrated in Kove since at least the 14th century, signifies a genuine sentiment, the remembrance of an improbable victory. It embodies a Pole, disguised as a Mongol, riding through the streets, symbolically declaring, quote, 3 Lek, 2 passed away on September 30th, 1288, less than a year following the Mongol retreat. His interment took place in the Dominican Church of the Holy Trinity in Kove, the very city he had preserved. He did not witness Poland's full unification, nor did he see the kingdom evolve into a major European power. Yet he lived long enough to observe Poland confront the medieval era's most formidable military menace and emerge victorious. And that, in itself, is sufficient. More than sufficient. I've dedicated considerable time detailing Poland's triumph over the Mongols, but I now wish to reflect on the significance of this narrative, why it transcends a mere interesting footnote in medieval history. Primarily, it epitomizes institutional learning. Poland's success against the Mongols wasn't due to suddenly superior warriors or the discovery of a secret weapon. Instead, they triumphed by assimilating lessons from their past failures. 2 prior invasions elucidated what methods were effective and what were not. Open field engagements proved detrimental. Wooden fortifications were inadequate. A fragmented command structure was ineffective. Consequently, they adopted stone fortifications, a unified defense strategy, and synchronized actions with allies. Their victory was, quite literally, constructed from the debris of their previous defeats. How frequently throughout history have individuals, organizations, and nations perpetuated the same errors? How often do we witness failure only for individuals to repeat the identical strategy, expecting a different outcome instead of learning? Poland could have followed this path. After 1259, they could have simply rebuilt and hoped the Mongols wouldn't return. Instead, they anticipated the Mongols' return and prepared accordingly. This mindset distinguishes survivors from victims. Survivors anticipate the worst and prepare for it. They don't merely hope for the best, but actively strive to make the best possible scenario a reality. When crisis strikes, they are prepared. Secondly, this account illustrates asymmetric warfare. The Mongols possessed every advantage in mobile combat: superior horses, archers, tactics, and coordination. Engaging them in open terrain invariably led to defeat. European forces, nonetheless, repeatedly attempted this, as cavalry charges were deeply ingrained in their culture, celebrated, and formed the very foundation of their military system. By 1287, Poland had discerned that one need not engage on the adversary's terms. Instead, they forged their own terms, compelling the Mongols into situations where their inherent advantages were nullified. The Mongols were highly mobile, so Poland opted for static defenses. They excelled in open landscapes, so Poland fought from fortified positions. They sought swift victories, so Poland imposed protracted sieges. This strategy holds relevance today in any competitive arena, military, business, sports, or otherwise. You will inevitably encounter adversaries superior in certain aspects. The crucial question is whether you attempt to beat them at their own game, or fundamentally alter the game itself. Poland altered the game, and it yielded success. Thirdly, and what resonates most profoundly with me, this is a narrative of resilience. Poland in 1287 was not a dominant power. It had been ravaged twice, was divided and impoverished. It had every justification to merely concede that the Mongols were insurmountable and seek accommodation, paying tribute or whatever was necessary to avert another invasion. Instead, they fought. They prepared, they adapted. And when the Mongols returned, anticipating another effortless triumph, Poland stood resolute and sent them home defeated. This matters. In a world where the powerful often seem to invariably prevail, where resistance frequently appears futile, and where wisely accepting one's fate often seems the prudent course, Poland's victory in 1287 serves as a powerful reminder that outcomes are not predetermined. Preparation, steadfast determination, and astute strategic thinking can surmount seemingly insurmountable odds. I am not asserting that victory is effortless or that the underdog always triumphs. Such a claim is neither true nor helpful to propagate. What I am asserting is that the underdog possesses a fighting chance if they demonstrate intelligence, learn from experience, and adapt to changing circumstances. Poland unequivocally demonstrated this. Now let us delve into subsequent events. The Mongol Empire persisted for an additional century and a half. Yet its expansion westward effectively ceased following its setbacks in Poland and Hungary during the 1280s. The vast empire balkanized into numerous smaller khanates, their primary focus shifting to internal conflicts rather than Europe conquest. While the Golden Horde maintained its power in Eastern Europe, it was on the decline and vanished entirely by the 15th century. Concurrently, Poland gradually achieved unity. It took another generation, but by 1320, Vladislav the Elbow High was crowned sovereign of a reunified Poland. The kingdom, which had been fractured and vulnerable in 1241, evolved into a prominent force in late medieval Europe, eventually forming the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that would dominate Eastern Europe for centuries. None of this was preordained. Had Poland fallen in 1287, and had the Mongols succeeded in their third incursion, the entire course of European history could have diverged significantly. Poland's steadfastness, its absorption of lessons from past defeats, and its construction of a sufficiently strong defense to resist, fundamentally altered history's trajectory. This brings me to my concluding point. History isn't a narrative of inescapable forces and predetermined outcomes. It's a testament to choices. Poland opted to erect stone fortifications. Lech II chose to ride to Hungary for assistance. The garrison of Sandomierz resolved to hold their ground. The Gorals chose to retaliate. Each of these decisions proved impactful. The Mongols chose to employ their familiar, formerly successful tactics. Talabuga Khan and Nogai Khan failed to coordinate their efforts effectively. Individual Mongol commanders made the choice to assault Kraków instead of bypassing it. These choices, too, had consequences. Ultimately, one set of choices resulted in triumph, the other in defeat. This illustrates how history operates, not through inevitability, but through the cumulative weight of thousands of individual decisions, some momentous, some minor, all of them significant. Therefore, when contemplating your own life and its challenges, recall Poland in 1287. Remember that setbacks don't have to be permanent. Remember your capacity to learn, adapt, and alter the dynamics of any struggle. Remember that stone walls and resolve can halt seemingly unstoppable armies. And if this narrative resonated with you, if it reshaped your perspective on resilience, strategy, or the essence of victory, please do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel as I have more stories like this one. Stories about pivotal historical moments that reveal deeper truths about the world's mechanisms. Leave a comment and share what you consider the most crucial lesson from Poland's victory, as I genuinely value your insights. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear a tale of surmounting seemingly insurmountable odds. Because in a world that often feels dominated by forces too immense to contend with, we all require reminders that resistance is not futile, that learning from defeat is possible, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog prevails. Poland confronted the Mongol Empire 3 times. Twice they were vanquished. Once they stood firm, and that single instance was enough to reshape history. The harbingers of doom rode into Poland, anticipating another effortless conquest. They encountered stone fortifications, determined defenders, and a kingdom that had learned from its errors. They discovered a Poland that refused to be a victim any longer, and the Mongols never returned. That is the essence of resilience. That is the power of gleaning wisdom from failure. That is the strength derived from refusing to accept defeat as inevitable. Poland in 1287 demonstrated that the impossible is merely the difficult that no one has yet figured out how to achieve. They figured it out. Stone by stone, strategy by strategy, battle by battle. They forged a victory from the ashes of 2 prior defeats, and if they could accomplish that, facing the mightiest military machine of the medieval era with limited resources and a divided kingdom, What is your excuse? Go build your walls, learn from your setbacks, change the rules of the game, and when your Mongols appear, whatever form they take, stand unwavering. Because that is what Poland did, and Poland emerged victorious.